Thanks for joining me today from New Mexico. We had a pretty awesome morning of racing. It's a beautiful place and we had a lot of fun. I hope you all are having a good Friday as well. I wanted to go ahead and join you a little bit early for the punctibyte this week, talking about this upcoming week as we run into the month of February. And we have a lot of scheduling to talk about. This week will be Lab 6 and 7 for most of you, though, of course, Aaron will run ahead to Lab 8. So we'll try to talk about all of those. I'll get to visit extra with Schwa and Rob this week in Open Lab, so I look forward to seeing you there. And I won't be gone again for a little while, so we don't have too many logistics with respect to that to deal with. I did, however, want to mention to all of you that some of your Fearless peer TAs are also doing a Canvas training group with me, and one of the things that we're doing for that are training sessions on Wednesdays. So I want to make note and invite everyone to come to our training session on the 12th. So this coming Wednesday, we're going to have another training session. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning in Engineering 2106. So over in Jesse's neck of the woods, we'll be meeting up and spending a little time with some Canvas training. But I think it would be a wonderful opportunity for all of you UTAs that are learning Canvas and also those that are just trying to get better with it. It would be a great time to come over and just visit about the LMS and start learning a little bit of extra and how to manage the system better in there. So one more time, over in Engineering 2106 on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Meet us there, and we're going to go through some more logistics about Canvas. It should be kind of fun. Okay, that being said, I want to jump into what delivering lectures and a little bit of feedback on that, because there was quite a number of you that got to deliver your first lectures. So this means that we're now we're poised and ready to learn a bit more about lecture delivery, and that's where I want to kick things off today. Then we'll work into a little bit about Canvas, and finally we'll go through the TA guidelines for Labs 6, 7, and 8. So delivering an effective lecture is quite an art, and I think that a lot of you learned after doing your first lecture just how much goes into this. I know that Rob was making some jokes before he began his lecture, and he said, well, what? You just read the slides, right? And we know that that's actually not the case at all. In fact, it takes a lot more preparation to deliver a lecture than of course it does to study as a student, to study that lecture or to take in that lecture. So let's talk about some techniques that can be very, very helpful in allowing you to give a very good lecture. First off, prepare by learning the content ahead of time. It's very important to know what you're going to be saying and to memorize it. Quite simply, you can't be looking at the slides the whole time and give an engaging lecture. Even after many, 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 many moons of delivering lectures, I still always study for them, because it's very important to me that I'm looking and talking to my students, not looking and talking to my notes. Nothing is more boring than looking and talking at your notes. In fact, that might as well just have an empty room of people if you're doing that, because there's nothing to engage with. So make sure that you take time to study the notes, not only to memorize them, but also to make them meaningful to you. So find something that relates to what you love and what you do to allow you to do a little bit better lecture by relating it to your interests. So it helps to engage your students, it helps to make you engaged, and let me tell you what, if you have something exciting to take with you to lecture, whether it be an example, whether it be a cartoon, a stuffed animal, whatever it might be, if you're excited about it, your students are going to be excited about it. So add those little logistics. I know that many of you on the Monday-Wednesday section did a rad demo for showing them how to streak into quadrants. That kind of thing gets you stoked, and when you're stoked, your students are stoked. So that being said, one of the things that you can do if you do memorize your notes and you're not constantly looking at them, it enables you to make eye contact, and eye contact is absolutely key to conversation. If you've ever had a conversation with someone who refuses to look at you, there is nothing more frustrating than that. You cannot connect with someone who is not looking at you. So try to individually make eye contact with each one of your students, and it works really well if you can make eye contact with those that might find particular pertinence in certain content that you're covering. So make sure that you establish that contact with each and every student. The students become accountable, they become invested in your lecture. Again, relate the lecture to the student's interests. So it's really great if you can come up with something explicit that brings up memories for that student and allows that student to build on the existing scaffold of knowledge that they already have. So for example, you might say something like, you know, hey, Josh, this is like when you were growing up in Dubai. Or Jesse, this is very similar to the hammer of Thor. You know, something that they can relate to and is engaging to them, no matter how cheesy that example might be. There's a wonderful cartoon that at one point the ECTL published, and in this cartoon it showed the professor giving the lecture and the student listening to the lecture, and both of them had the thought bubbles where they were somewhere else. That is to say, you want to be present in your lecture. Don't let your thought bubbles be somewhere else. Don't let your eyes be out the window. Instead, be very much present in what you're doing at that time so that your students will also be present and engaged. Pay attention to your students' vibes. I mean, really, all it should take is looking around to know whether or not they're with you. If your students are staring out the window or twiddling their thumbs or they just look utterly confused, pay attention to that and ask them. Say, you know, Jill, you're looking a little confused. What can I do to help clear this up for you? Really get the vibes from them. And that, of course, does require that you're not staring at your slides, but you're instead staring and making good contact with them. Become aware of your nervous behaviors. Maybe you like to say or ah, or you're like me and you like to say cool or awesome a lot. And if you do that, become aware of those behaviors, and just awareness of those behaviors helps you to moderate them. And I know many of you have worked very, very hard on this and removing some of those nervous behaviors. I do video of each and every one of you, and I share that video with you so you can actually see what those nervous behaviors are. A lot of people tend to have whether they're auditory pauses, or they tend to do things like holding onto the side of the bench and kind of rocking back and forth. Those kinds of things are very distracting. Take that nervous energy and instead turn it into enthusiasm or something that allows your lecture to be better rather than distracting. Most everyone can slow down. That is, I've rarely seen a lecture that was way too fast. So go ahead, ramp it down just a little bit, and also ramp the level of loudness up. So go ahead and be pretty loud, because remember how many fans are blowing in people's ears and whatnot. That can be very, very distracting. Okay, great. So interlace your personality. The last thing there is very important as well. Bring in who you are. Not everyone is going to lecture the same way that I lecture, or the same way that Aaron Spurlock lectures, or the same way that Josh lectures. So make sure you bring in your own personality, whether it be ditziness, dryness, or whatever works for you. Make it a part of your lecture and allow your students to personally connect with you. That being said, I want to cover just one little thing as adding assignment in Canvas, so we'll jump over and do that. We'll just go ahead and add this assignment for section 11, and I'll just show you guys how to add one assignment to the gradebook. I noticed that a lot of you have already done this, and a lot of you are returning TAs, so this is old hat, but just in case, for those of you who are learning, this is how you would do this. Essentially what you've got here is a tab entitled Assignments over on the left bar, and you can click on that. And we know that the students have submitted their Gram-Stain report, and you guys are working through the grading on the Gram-Stain report. So obviously you're going to need to have a place in the gradebook where you can put the grade for the Gram-Stain report. So I'll just add that in here. So all I did was go over to the right side and I clicked on Add Assignment, and now I'm just naming the assignment. And you can put a due date on it if you want to. That's probably not necessary in this particular case. So because they're obviously, they submitted it in lecture. If you did want them to submit it online or something, it would be a good idea to have a due date on there. We know that the Gram-Stain is worth 15 points, so we can say update. And this should now appear in the gradebook. So we can actually go ahead and hit on grades and see if we recognize this appearing in the gradebook. And I'm just moving over so that we don't see student names, but I just wanted to show you that now that we have added that assignment, we should be able to pick it up in the grade book. So you recognize that it's present, and you can actually go ahead and hit on speed grader, and you can enter in scores into the Gram-Stain report, and that's a really easy way to go about that. So either through this speed grader or just going down straight down the list, whatever seems to be easiest for you. So that's how that works to add an assignment. But hey, one more plug for the Wednesday session, because we can cover a lot more things and you can ask a lot of great questions in that session. And now we're ready to talk about your TA guidelines. So in Lab 6, which we've already talked a little bit about, you want to make sure that you have the table that summarizes Lab 5 data, get them really thinking about making those dilution calculations and firming those up. Today is also the day that you're going to be T-streaking, so I know that all of you have some creative streaking demo planned. Hopefully not too creative, but something that will be engaging nonetheless. And also we'll be covering environmental influences during this lab. There are, again, some great pictures to go along with this and a lot of really rich information. This information is going to be information that the Gen Micro students are responsible for lecture as well. So it's important that you do a good job of covering it and don't feel as though they're getting it from some other source. You will be the source for this particular lecture. So as we move from Lecture 6 to Lecture 7, we will be talking a little bit about Vibrio fischeri and the bioluminescence phenomenon. So taking a look at the guidelines for Lab 7, few things today. They will be doing their Pipette Man tutorial, and they'll need to remember to turn that in before they go. You have my complete permission to totally support them in this assignment. It does not have to be like 100% independent work. They can work together, they can work with you, and you can help them out with answering some of the questions. The point of this assignment is to try to get them familiar with the Pipette Man and to hopefully, fingers crossed, get them using the Pipette Man right the first time they use it, not to develop bad habits. So try to get them to turn that in. Another thing is to make sure that they follow up on their T-streak, because they will have 2 isolated colonies on that T-streak today. They'll have a Micrococcus luteus, small, tiny yellow colony, and they'll also have a Staphylococcus aureus, larger, whitish looking colony. They're going to want to select one of those and re-streak with that one. So don't let them forget to do the re-streak. Also, when they do the re-streak, make sure they're aware of the fact that it's very hard to get isolation from a colony. So they need to make sure to take only a very little bit from that colony so that they don't end up with 0 isolation the next time. For the bioluminescence, typically what we do with that is to take them into the back room and have someone go with them who can give another tiny mini lecture in the dark. In that mini lecture in the dark, I usually ask them I usually go back and review the reaction mechanism for bioluminescence and talk a little bit about the needed reactants in that reaction. And I try to draw their attention to the fact that oxygen is one of the essential reactants. Then by that point, their eyes have adjusted, and then I can say, so if oxygen is necessary for this bioluminescence reaction, what do we need to do to the flask in order to see it? And they'll say, well, you got to swirl it. And so we swirl it, and then we talk about the fact that the Vibrio fischeri can live outside of the squid, but they don't bioluminesce there. So that we talk about the concentration dependence and how the squid expels 90% of the culture every single day and then recultivates from the remaining 10% the glowing culture for that next night. So that idea of keeping a continuous culture can be very nicely related to lecture coverage when thinking about the growth curve and how if the culture were not refreshed every day, it would go into the stationary and death phase, and the bioluminescence would no longer be visible. So it's a nice place in which to situate a little bit of content linkage with lecture. Okay, great. That is Lab 7. Now, one thing on the lecture for that lab is that if you are not comfortable with giving a really good, really clear lecture, because there's biochemistry in that lecture, if you're not comfortable with that, please see me, talk to me, have me do that lecture, at least for the sections that I supervise, because that is something that I enjoy doing, and I definitely want to make sure that the students get a good experience when they hear that lecture. One last note, some students will bring mud and water for the Winogradsky column. I don't know how many people will, because obviously most bodies of water near Laramie are frozen. If they do, again, overarchingly, this is an extra credit assignment, and we will be following up on it. You can remind them that that will be way later in the semester during Lab 24. Lastly, really quickly, let's talk about the Lab 8. And this is going to be the very thorough coverage of antimicrobial substances and UV light. So Kirby-Bauer, streptomycin resistance, UV light, and looking at all of those kind of ways to moderate the growth of bacteria and or to kill. So we'll talk about UV light in respect to the formation of thymine dimers, and the lecture coverage is very thorough on this. It should be straightforward as far as having everything that you need in the lecture to talk about this topic. Do have someone near the UV light station so that they can remind the students that they need to take the lid off before exposing their plate to the UV light. If they don't, the light will not penetrate the lid. That is the quintessential feature of UV light as a sterilizing agent, is that it does have very poor penetrating power. The Kirby-Bauer assay is probably the most important assay that we do, and it relates very nicely to the lecture coverage about antibiotic resistance. We can talk about the importance of checking for susceptibility or sensitivity to an antibiotic before simply prescribing that antibiotic. Get the students ready to not only perform that experiment today, but also to measure the zones of inhibition, measuring the full diameter the next time we come in. Lastly, when they do the streptomycin resistance experiment, the one thing that tends to be confusing on that is that they will basically do the same experiment in two systems. They'll do it in broth and they'll do it on agar. And so it's helpful if you can go around and talk to the groups while they're doing the streptomycin resistance and talk to them about how, okay, you're adding streptomycin to broth, you're adding E. coli to that broth, what is going to grow in the broth with streptomycin in it, and talk to them about how they're doing the same experiment, just using broth, one using agar. So I hope that that is helpful, and that is the wrap up for the labs that are pertinent to us this week. I hope you all had a fantastic Friday, and I will be seeing you soon.